Welcome, wanderers of the night, to Petra's Dark and Dreamy, where shadows dance and dreams drift through the twilight. I'm Petra, your guide through this realm where the boundaries of reality blur and the mystical becomes tangible. Tonight, we plunge into the depths of the unknown, exploring stories that shimmer in the darkness and ideas that echo through the silence. So, find a cozy nook, let the world outside fade away, and prepare to embark on a journey where the night is always young and the dreams are endlessly alluring. Are you ready to embrace the dark and the dreamy? Then let's begin. The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. Book 2, Chapter 5, The Stillness. My first act before I went into the pantry was to fasten the door between the kitchen and scullery. But the pantry was empty. Every scrap of food had gone. Apparently, the Martian had taken it all on the previous day. At that discovery, I despaired for the first time. I took no food and no drink either on the 11th or the 12th day. At first, my mouth and throat were parched and my strength ebbed sensibly. I sat about in the darkness of the scullery in a state of despondent wretchedness. My mind ran on eating. I thought I had become deaf, for the noises of movement I had been accustomed to hear from the pit ceased absolutely. I did not feel strong enough to crawl noiselessly to the peephole, or I would have gone there. On the 12th day, my throat was so painful that, taking the chance of alarming the Martians, I attacked the creaking rainwater pump that stood by the sink and got a couple of glassfuls of blackened and tainted rainwater. I was greatly refreshed by this and emboldened by the fact that no inquiring tentacle followed the noise of my pumping. During these days, I thought much of the curate and of the manner of his death in a rambling, inconclusive manner. On the 13th day, I drank some more water and dozed and thought disjointedly of eating and of vague, impossible plans of escape. Whenever I dozed, I dreamt of horrible phantasms, of the death of the curate, or of sumptuous dinners. But, sleeping or awake, I felt a keen pain that urged me to drink again and again. The light that came into the scullery was no longer gray, but red. To my disordered imagination, it seemed the color of blood. On the 14th day, I went into the kitchen, and I was surprised to find that the fronds of the red weed had grown right across the hole in the wall, turning the half-light of the place into a crimson-colored obscurity. It was early on the 15th day that I heard a curious, familiar sequence of sounds in the kitchen, and, listening, identified it as the snuffing and scratching of a dog. Going into the kitchen, I saw a dog's nose peering in through a break among the ruddy fronds. This greatly surprised me. At the scent of me, he barked shortly. I thought if I could induce him to come into the place quietly, I should be able, perhaps, to kill and eat him. And in any case, it would be advisable to kill him, lest his actions attracted the attention of the Martians. I crept forward, saying, "Good dog," very softly, but he suddenly withdrew his head and disappeared. I listened. I was not deaf, but certainly the pit was still. I heard a sound like the flutter of a bird's wings and a horse croaking, but that was all. For a long while, I lay close to the peephole, but not daring to move aside the red plants that obscured it. Once or twice, I heard a faint pitter-patter like the feet of the dog going hither and thither on the sand far below me, and there were more bird-like sounds, but that was all. At length, encouraged by the silence, I looked out. Except in the corner, where a multitude of crows hopped and fought over the skeletons of the dead the Martians had consumed, there was not a living thing in the pit. I stared about me, scarcely believing my eyes. All of the machinery had gone. Save for the big mound of grayish-blue powder in one corner, certain bars of aluminum in another, the black birds and the skeletons of the killed, the place was merely an empty circular pit in the sand. Slowly, I thrust myself out through the red weed and stood up on the mound of rubble. I could see in any direction save behind me to the north, and neither Martian nor sign of Martian was to be seen. The pit dropped sheerly from my feet, but a little way along, the rubbish afforded a practical slope to the summit of the ruins. My chance of escape had come. I began to tremble. I hesitated for some time, and then, in a gust of desperate resolution, and with a heart that throbbed violently, I scrambled to the top of the mound in which I had been buried so long. I looked about again. To the northward, too, no Martian was visible. When I had last seen this part of Sheen in the daylight, it had been a straggling street of comfortable white and red houses, interspersed with abundant shady trees. Now I stood on a mound of smashed brickwork, clay and gravel, over which spread a multitude of red cactus-shaped plants, knee-high, without a solitary terrestrial growth to dispute their footing. The trees near me were dead and brown, but further, a network of red threads scaled the still-living stems. The neighboring houses had all been wrecked, but none had been burned. Their walls stood sometimes to the second story, with smashed windows and shattered doors. The red weed grew tumultuously in their roofless rooms. Below me was the great pit, with the crows struggling for its refuse. A number of other birds hopped about among the ruins. Far away, I saw a gaunt cat slink crouchingly along a wall, but traces of men there were none. The day seemed, by contrast with my recent confinement, dazzlingly bright, the sky a glowing blue. A gentle breeze kept the red weed that covered every scrap of unoccupied ground gently swaying. And oh, the sweetness of the air. Chapter 6: The Work of 15 Days. For some time, I stood tottering on the mound, regardless of my safety. Within that noisome din from which I had emerged, I had thought with a narrow intensity only of our immediate security. I had not realized what had been happening to the world, had not anticipated this startling vision of unfamiliar things. I had expected to see Sheen in ruins. I found about me the landscape, weird and lurid, of another planet. For that moment, I touched an emotion beyond the common range of men, yet one that the poor brutes we dominate know only too well. I felt as a rabbit might feel returning to his burrow, and suddenly confronted by the work of a dozen busy navvies digging the foundations of a house. I felt the first inkling of a thing that presently grew quite clear in my mind that oppressed me for many days, a sense of dethronement, a persuasion that I was no longer a master, but an animal among the animals, under the Martian heel. With us it would be as with them, to lurk and watch, to run and hide. The fear and empire of man had passed away. But so soon as this strangeness had been realized, it passed, and my dominant motive became the hunger of my long and dismal fast. In the direction away from the pit, I saw, beyond a red-covered wall, a patch of garden ground unburied. This gave me a hint, and I went knee-deep and sometimes neck-deep in the red weed. The density of the weed gave me a reassuring sense of hiding. The wall was some 6 feet high, and when I attempted to clamber it, I found I could not lift my feet to the crest. So I went along by the side of it and came to a corner and a rockwork that enabled me to get to the top and tumble into the garden I coveted. Here I found some young onions, a couple of gladiolus bulbs, and a quantity of immature carrots, all of which I secured, and scrambling over a ruined wall, went on my way through scarlet and crimson trees toward Q. It was like walking through an avenue of gigantic blood drops, possessed with two ideas: to get more food and to limp as soon and as far as my strength permitted out of this accursed, unearthly region of the pit. Some way further, in a grassy place, was a group of mushrooms, which I also devoured, and then I came upon a brown sheet of flowing, shallow water where meadows used to be. These fragments of nourishment served only to whet my hunger. At first, I was surprised at this flood in a hot, dry summer, but afterwards I discovered that this was caused by the tropical exuberance of the red weed. Directly this extraordinary growth encountered water, it straightway became gigantic and of unparalleled fecundity. Its seeds were simply poured down into the water of the Wey and Thames, and its swiftly growing and titanic water fronds speedily choked both these rivers. At Putney, as I afterwards saw, the bridge was almost lost in a tangle of the weed, and at Richmond, too, the Thames water poured in a broad and shallow stream across the meadows of Hampton and Twickenham. As the waters spread, the weed followed them, until the ruined villas of the Thames Valley were for a time lost in this red swamp, whose margin I explored, and much of the desolation the Martians had caused was concealed. In the end, the red weed succumbed almost as quickly as it spread, a cankering disease due, it is believed, to the action of certain bacteria presently seized upon it. Now, by the action of natural selection, all terrestrial plants have acquired a resisting power against bacterial diseases. They never succumb without a severe struggle. But the red weed rotted like a thing already dead. The fronds became bleached and then shriveled and brittle. They broke off at the least touch, and the waters that had stimulated their early growth carried their last vestiges out to sea. My first act on coming to this water was, of course, to slake my thirst. I drank a great bulk of water and, moved by an impulse, gnawed some fronds of red weed, but they were watery and had a sickly metallic taste. I found the water was sufficiently shallow for me to wade securely, although the red weed impeded my feet a little, but the flood evidently got deeper towards the river, and I turned back towards Mortlake. I managed to make out the road by means of occasional ruins of its villas and fences and lamps. And so presently I got out of this spate and made my way to the hill going up towards Roehampton and came out on Putney Common. Here the scenery changed from the strange and unfamiliar to the wreckage of the familiar. Patches of ground exhibited the devastation of a cyclone, and in a few score yards I would come upon perfectly undisturbed spaces, houses with their blinds trimly drawn and doors closed, as if they had been left for a day by the owners, or as if their inhabitants slept within. The red weed was less abundant. The tall trees along the lane were free from the red creeper. I hunted for food among the trees, finding nothing, and I also raided a couple of silent houses, but they had already been broken into and ransacked. I rested for the remainder of the daylight in a shrubbery, being, in my enfeebled condition, too fatigued to push on. All this time, I saw no human beings and no signs of the Martians. I encountered a couple of hungry-looking dogs, but both hurried circuitously away from the advances I made them. Near Roehampton, I had seen 2 human skeletons, not bodies but skeletons, picked clean. And in the wood by me I found the crushed and scattered bones of several cats and rabbits and the skull of a sheep. But though I gnawed parts of these in my mouth, there was nothing to be got from them. After sunset, I struggled on along the road towards Putney, where I think the heat ray must have been used for some reason. And in a garden beyond Roehampton, I saw a quantity of immature potatoes sufficient to stay my hunger. From this garden, one saw down upon Putney and the river. The aspect of the place in the dusk was singularly desolate. Blackened trees, blackened, desolate ruins, and down the hill the sheets of the flooded river, red tinged with the weed. And over all, silence. It filled me with indescribable terror to think how swiftly that desolating change had come. For a time, I believed that mankind had been swept out of existence and that I stood there alone, the last man left alive. Hard by the top of Putney Hill, I came upon another skeleton, with the arms dislocated and removed several yards from the rest of the body. As I proceeded, I became more and more convinced that the extermination of mankind was, save for such stragglers as myself, already accomplished in this part of the world. The Martians, I thought, had gone on and left the country desolated, seeking food elsewhere. Perhaps even now they were destroying Berlin or Paris, or it might be they had gone northward. Thank you for tuning in and listening to this episode. Your support means the world to me, and I'm so grateful you've joined me on this journey. If you enjoyed the podcast, please take a moment to leave a review, whether on your favorite podcast platform or wherever you listen. Your feedback helps the show grow, and it lets others discover the stories we're sharing. Be sure to like, follow, download, and subscribe to support the show. If you are one of the first 100 subscribers, you can request your favorite literature read by me, Petra. Until next time, take care. I can't wait to see you back for the next episode, and sweet sleep.